This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper Forward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and I'm joined by Sergei Kutrovski. Welcome back to the podcast, Sergei.
Good to be here.
We are talking about the role of cafe managers in the cafe today. And in the last episode, we spoke about what the cafe manager does. In this episode, I want to talk about how that's evolved over let's say the past decade. I'm watching a show at the moment that I want everybody to watch. It's called The Bear, and it is a very thoughtful insight into the dysfunction that happens in hospitality environments. And it takes an exploration of how we come together as a group of people to, let's say, work in a cafe. We all bring our shit because we have such a low barrier to entry into our industry. And I've said it before many times on this podcast, we kind of attract a certain kind of insecure person to our industry. And then we kind of come together around these values of community and service and hospitality, which are all very lovely things. And then in amongst all of this chaos, somehow we feel like a family.
Sheesh.
You know?
Yeah.
Like somehow we count on each other to get through very difficult rush periods, and we learn to depend on each other. And a lot of the times there's people that are swearing at each other, and there's a lot of, but then what we do is we add these other elements, all the stuff that we talked about in the last episode. And the kind of stuff that we're talking about is inflation. We're talking about geopolitical issues. We're talking about diversity. We're talking about unionization. We're talking about all this other stuff. So somebody who, as you mentioned in the last episode, who may end up become a cafe manager because the last cafe manager left. And they're now like being given 30 cents an hour extra to become the cafe manager with zero experience. How has the role of the cafe manager changed as the world has changed?
Well, that's a big one because COVID, that was
I didn't even mention
major, that changed, and we pivoted all businesses, classic, word that we overuse many, many times. But roles changed as well within that. I think when I stepped into management at that first cafe, I kind of stepped in with the cliche that, and the stereotype that we talk about all the time, managers are probably the hardest working employees on your team. Like they come in early, leave late kind of. And it was a lot of it had to do around that practical, like get everything done, get everything clean. There was more of like a practical hands-on difficulty. But obviously over the course of the years, like businesses, especially like cafes, restaurants, the hospitality industry has played a much deeper role in society, especially during COVID. You and I talked about it a lot. Like how do you take care of people? And then how do you take care of the general public who may never step into your cafe, but may see that your cafe has an open door and it allows people in and they don't agree with that, or may see someone sitting in the cafe not wearing a mask. And then the idea of like, oh, this institution doesn't support this kind of thing. So now the responsibility changes on someone who came in just thinking they would work hard. They're spending 40 plus hours in the cafe. And because they're there, and they spend so much time, now the responsibility is also to help and address the public. Like I'm talking about this and I'm like, this is like, I don't even know, like, how do you train that? Like, I don't even know, like, if we as a manager right now, when I would like pass on the battalion maybe to someone else to go and manage a cafe, like, how do you prepare for unforeseen like situations? Again, what we talked about in the beginning, if those values are set, then you can respond according to those values. But the actual role is so much bigger. And with social media, like that's another thing. You're not only managing a physical location, you're now managing a location that's, that's meta, that's out there. And you have to be responsible with not only how the things you post, but when things happen, like how do you respond? Because that, I feel like the main thing that's changed for me is the fact that hospitality is not only face-to-face interaction now. It's way bigger than that. Like I take, part of my role is also to take a little bit of photos and to be able to manage the social media. I don't do all of the posting, but I create a lot of the content. There's so many thoughts that are going through my head. Like not only like, is the lighting nice, but the fact that is like, what am I communicating? And what am I saying? Like, how am I using this piece of content to actually provide good hospitality before anyone enters? And as culture changes, that content has to change. Like you can't just post photos of latte art over and over again. That's part of hospitality, but that does not communicate in how you respond to different issues within, the United States, but for us, but also within maybe your local government and your local community that's going through something. So you have to be way more intentional in communication, whether that's directly or on social media. Sorry, I keep talking. I should give you some space.
No. I'm loving listening to this. Go ahead. Keep going, please. Just talk.
But that's a big one because my first management job, like I actually created an Instagram while I was managing. Like I had no idea how to use Instagram. Wow. Now, like, and it hasn't been that long. I think it's been like 5 years. And now like that's a major way of communicating with the community. And also as like following grows, you're not only communicating within your community, you're having to respond to things that are happening globally. So everything, like policies change. Like, well, one of the things for me, I'm a Russian immigrant. I'm saying that, and then I'm like, well, how do I say that better? Because I was born in Estonia, and I'm from the former Soviet Union, but my parents are Russian Ukrainian. That's also complicated. Anyway, but within that, like part of my responsibility was also like, well, how do we respond to the Slavic community in my town? Like, how do we provide good hospitality to a community that at this point may be villainized? Like, what do we do? Like, I literally have to sit down and think of it. And I have sometimes a hard time affiliating with the Slavic community here, but I had to call my mom and ask her like some very hard questions to get her perspective as a person who directly like has lived a little more than half her life in the United States, but she grew up in the former Soviet Union. So how do I honor her? And as a manager, and then how do I pass on my experience, her experience to my team? So it's, as you see, like stuff like that is just complicated. And I can't say there's like an easy answer or a pat down answer. This is what you need to do. Communication is obviously key. That has never changed. If we want to talk about like all of the things that have changed, like good communication was good, 15 years ago in the coffee industry or however long you've been in, and it's still going to be good now. If you practice good communication skills, you're going to probably do the right thing as long as you're long as you're leading with empathy. Right. But it's like those things haven't changed. So within that context, those are like two, I think, very specific examples that I had to like practically recently deal with and still trying to figure out what happens when a lot of the folks are talking about how do we respond to COVID in the fall, possibly another spike, or who knows what happens. And for our little town, it's been fun. You know what I mean? I'm like
fun in inverted commas.
Fun. Yeah. And honestly, I can without laughing say it's been fun because for me, problem solving is exciting.
Yeah.
Like
you and I both.
That's part of, that's what I want to do. Like sometimes it is freaky to navigate all of the issues in the world, but I have an opportunity to lead a group of people and then lead my community because I manage a cafe. Like that's ridiculous.
It's pretty cool, right?
That's really cool. Yeah. But that should add a little bit of weight to any manager and be like, hey,
It's a responsibility.
You are responsible. Yeah.
With the way that our current workforce is shifting and evolving, and I want to talk generational stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a Gen X. You're millennial, Gen Y?
Yeah, millennial. Yeah.
And the
older millennial.
Older millennial.
Yeah.
And now we've got a cohort that are aging into our workforce and are taking up a big majority of the kind of barista positions that are there in a cafe. And there's very distinct work ethics, if we talk very generally, between those three generations.
Oh, yeah.
And what I'm hearing, you're like, oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What I'm hearing is that is something that is presenting as perhaps the most challenging thing for cafe owners that has changed over the years, is that when my generation we were the baristas, it was just hard work. You know, you didn't talk about your mental health. You didn't talk about any of this kind of stuff. And as we come into the Gen Zs, what we're starting to see is the biggest concern most cafe owners and cafe managers have is, how do I manage my employees' mental health as the stuff we were talking about as we head into all of these kind of uncertain times around all of that stuff?
Yeah.
Do you see that as something that has definitely changed over the years as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think I stepped into management when those conversations were made a little more public. It was the beginning of that. But as, you know, shit hit the fan more and more, like things changed, and the intensity of those conversations definitely went up. And honestly, it's like, if managers are not creating space for conversation, that's kind of the easiest thing to say. You won't know what to expect. You just won't if you're not creating the space. So there has to be some kind of infrastructure created to listen. Like my role as a manager is not to always have the right answer. It's like space to collect ideas, process them, and make a decision. So I have to make space to listen. And that's been like everything you've just shared. Like I'm experiencing right now. I have a great team that I'm working with right now, and they're super anxious in a positive way of like, what's next? You know what I mean? And that's great. Like I love that about the current generation, like the excitement, maybe to innovate, to pioneer. And I'm like, yo, we just opened the cafe up 4 months ago. Like, what do you mean what's next? This is next. Like, we're crushing it. Like,
we're just gonna do these lots.
Yeah, let's do this and then see what that brings. Like, patience is key, and that's a big one. So like having those conversations, and at the same time creating space to listen. So people have to know that they're heard. Like, you're not just shoving that information down and saying like it doesn't matter, but you're understanding what's happening, you're witnessing what's happening, and then you're making a decision that provides like empathy. I keep saying I'll continue to do that because it goes such a long way. And then also it creates space for folks to be like, okay, I'm actually taken care of here, which the result of that is better retention. Like, you know, we complain about there's like a high turnover rate. Well, we should probably take care of our staff. Like, that's kind of easy. And that doesn't always mean financial. It's like make space to sit down and have a one-on-one. Like,
especially
I don't know
with
how
this
many
generation.
Yeah. I don't know how many cafes practice one-on-ones, but like, I would say if you're not, you should. That's a big deal. Like, sit down and just listen to your staff. Like, that's how you lead. Like, I don't know. I say that in almost like a very kind of negative and like way, because I'm like, you don't do this. Like, this is almost like common sense. You should be doing this, because when things come up and you have that trust built, you have that connection made, you can tackle those hard questions, and you don't have to be afraid of like being misunderstood. Like I'm one of those, I guess, what should I, type A, like if you're into the Enneagram, like the Enneagram 1 personality, where, you know, things matter. Like they have to be in order. And like, there's also this fear about not being yourself, like understood very well. And so like the more relationship I build with the team, the more comfortable I feel in my ability to go through and lead folks through difficult times, and then personally take care of them when it comes to the things like mental health. Like, when do you need space? Like, what do you need to be able to flourish as a person, not as an employee, not as, again, part of the team, but how can I take care of you as a person? Like, maybe, like, this is a controversial one, I think. Like, when is the right time to champion someone to go and pursue what they're actually passionate about?
Rather than stay in the cafe.
Yeah. Like, yes, retention. Yes, that's beneficial for the business. But at some point, when you see someone just kills it in a certain area, like, as a manager, my responsibility is to champion them, to go and pursue that. Because it doesn't benefit me or the business to hold on to people that are just good at their job.
In a labor shortage, the person who's running the cafe will turn around and say, why would you do that? And this is where you're the middleman here, or the middle person, right? Like, you've got this staff that you can see, this staff member, they are not in the right place. This is not the right place for them. Go forth and prosper. Right. Yeah. And then, but that puts you in a challenging situation where in a labor shortage, you can't find somebody to replace that person. So you may have to take anyone that you can get. So therefore, the owner may turn around and say, but wouldn't it be better to have had that person in the first place? You then have to get into a conversation about, that's not the vibe that I'm trying to create here. That's not the culture of what we stand for, et cetera, et cetera. This is all different than how it used to be. Yep. All of this is new. And I don't mean new like 2022. I mean just like since COVID. Mm-hmm. This is why I feel that choosing a manager for your cafe now, sure, they have to be able to understand how to price out product and do cost breakdown analysis. And we haven't even talked about any of that stuff. Sure, that's something that they have to do. But get yourself a manager that has empathy. Mm-hmm. Get yourself a manager who understands how to communicate with people. Avoid managers who are all about the fucking ego. Yeah. Because we all know managers that just want to be the boss. Yeah. They just want to tell people what to do. That is going to get you into a world of hurt these days, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think within that, going back to what you said earlier about the worry of like, well, if you let that person go, like, how are you going to replace him? Well, that's also part of ownership to have a system in place for that. Mm-hmm. Like if an owner is like, if you have a small staff, like I don't know how big average cafe staffs, like I've seen anything from one cafe having like 30 baristas to like 4. But depending on the size of your team, like if all of your eggs are in that basket and that person quits, like the other thing is you just really don't know what could happen the next day. They could get in an accident, something could happen, and you have to have a plan for that. So therefore having just system set for quicker training, like what does that look like? How can you have someone that can fill in? And then at the end of the day, the regulars that come to the cafe, the regulars that I meet are usually the folks who want to work there.
Yes, that's true.
So at the end of the day, it's like, yes, there's a labor shortage. But right now in my systems binder, I have a stack of resumes of people I know.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That would love to work there.
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
Like, even I'm thinking about, like, I literally got a DM today that says, yo, like, I just want to hang out with y'all. Like, I want to be there. I want to be in the space. Like, yes, coffee, that's cool. But I want to be surrounded by this type of community. I think like maybe I'm too optimistic. I get it. But I'm thinking like if you create that positive culture, if you create that vibe, if you have systems in place, like you can manage through it.
Yeah, not easily, but it's doable. Yeah, it's doable. And I would encourage to wrap up this episode, go and watch The Bear, because they take you in the first season. They take you through utter fucking chaos to order, which then turns into chaos again. But through good management, they have shown how you can take toxic dysfunction and shift the narrative a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I just encourage everyone to go and check it out. It really is fantastic. Like the best show I've seen this year. So
I got to start that tonight. Well,
yeah. No, don't do it tonight. You won't go to sleep. Honestly, like I made the mistake of watching it before I was going to bed. I'm like, fuck, I can't go to sleep now. I've got to watch the whole thing. Anyway, next episode, we're going to talk about the hardest parts of your job because the world has changed in so many ways. And as you were mentioning, social media is a part of that world now. So that presents, God bless Twitter. It just adds such a layer of challenges to the job of a cafe manager these days for many reasons. And I've got an example that I'll bring up, but we'll do that in the next episode. Cool. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.